Have you ever bought a beautiful orchid, only to watch it slowly decline? The flowers fall, the leaves become wrinkled, the roots start looking unhealthy, and eventually, the plant that once looked stunning now seems like it's barely hanging on. And honestly, you're not alone. Millions of orchid owners experience the exact same thing every year. That matters more than people realize, because orchids have developed a reputation for being difficult, fragile, high maintenance, almost impossible to keep alive. But here's the hidden truth. Most orchids don't die because orchids are difficult. Most orchids die because people accidentally care for them like ordinary houseplants. That changes everything. Because orchids aren't ordinary houseplants. They grow differently, drink differently, breathe differently, and respond differently to their environment. Once you understand that, growing orchids becomes dramatically easier. Today we're talking about 7 mistakes that kill more orchids than almost anything else. Some of these mistakes are incredibly common. In fact, there's a good chance you've already made at least one of them. And honestly, I know I certainly did when I first started growing orchids. The good news? Every mistake on today's list is completely fixable. Let's start with one of the biggest orchid killers of all. Mistake number 7. Treating orchids like regular houseplants. This is where many orchid problems begin. And honestly, it's completely understandable. Most people bring home an orchid and place it beside their other houseplants. The pothos, the peace lily, the philodendron, the spider plant, and then they provide exactly the same care. That seems logical. But here's the hidden truth. Orchids are different. Very different. Most common houseplants grow naturally in soil. Many orchids do not. In nature, many orchids grow attached to tree branches. Not in the ground. Not in garden soil. Not in rich compost. They cling to bark. Their roots are exposed to moving air. Rien arrive. The roots absorb moisture. Then they dry again. That's the cycle. Scientifically speaking, many orchid roots have evolved to absorb water quickly, while also requiring excellent oxygen access. That's why orchid roots behave differently than typical houseplant roots. Imagine taking a fish and trying to care for it like a hamster. Both are pets, but their needs are completely different. Orchids work the same way. They aren't difficult. They're simply different. Now imagine an orchid receiving care designed specifically for orchids. Proper airflow, proper watering, proper growing medium. Suddenly the plant begins thriving. That's not luck. That's understanding. Now here's an expert tip. Before caring for any orchid, learn what type of orchid you actually own. Different orchids have different needs. Most beginners grow Phalaenopsis orchids, and understanding that species alone can solve countless problems. But even if you understand orchids are different, the next mistake can still destroy them surprisingly quickly. And honestly, it's probably the most common orchid killer on Earth. Mistake number 6. Watering too often. If there is one mistake responsible for killing more orchids than almost anything else, it's overwatering. And honestly, most orchid owners do it because they care too much, not too little. Now think about that for a moment. People see an orchid. They want it to stay healthy, so they water frequently, every few days. sometimes every day, especially when they notice flowers dropping or leaves looking stressed. The assumption seems reasonable. The plant looks unhappy, so it must need more water, right? Unfortunately, that's often the exact opposite of what the orchid needs. That changes everything. Most orchid owners never hear this. Healthy orchid roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. Scientifically speaking, roots absorb oxygen from tiny air spaces surrounding them. When the growing medium remains constantly wet, those air spaces disappear. The roots begin suffocating. Root rot develops, and once roots begin failing, the entire plant begins declining. That's why overwatered orchids often look thirsty. The damaged roots can no longer absorb water properly. The leaves wrinkle, the owner adds even more water, and the cycle gets worse. Imagine wearing a pair of soaking wet shoes every day for months. Eventually, problems appear. Orchid roots respond similarly. They need periods of drying between waterings, especially Phalaenopsis orchids. Now here's where things become interesting. Experienced orchid growers rarely water on schedules. They water based on conditions. Humidity changes, temperature changes, season changes. The orchid's needs change too. That's why one orchid may need water every 5 days during summer and every 10 days during winter. The plant decides, not the calendar. Now, here's an expert tip. Before watering, look at the roots. Healthy roots are often green after watering and silvery gray when dry. That simple observation can prevent countless watering mistakes. And honestly, learning when not to water is one of the most important orchid skills you'll ever develop. But even perfectly watered orchids struggle when another common mistake occurs. And it usually happens because people are trying to protect their plants. Mistake number 5. Keeping orchids in dark rooms. This mistake is incredibly common, and honestly, it's easy to understand why it happens. People hear that orchids dislike direct sun, which is true. Then they move the orchid into a dark corner, which is not true. That changes everything, because orchids need far more light than most people realize. Not harsh sunlight, but bright light. There's a huge difference. Most orchid owners never hear this. An orchid can survive in low light for years. But surviving and thriving are not the same thing. Scientifically speaking, photosynthesis powers everything. Root growth, leaf growth, flower production, energy storage. Without adequate light, the plant simply doesn't generate enough energy to perform at its best. Imagine trying to run a large home using a nearly empty battery. Some functions still work, but performance declines. Orchids behave similarly. The leaves remain alive. The roots remain alive, but flowering becomes weaker. Growth slows. The plant gradually loses vigor. Now here's where things become interesting. Many homes already have enough light. The orchid is simply positioned too far from the window. Most people don't realize how dramatically indoor light levels drop just a few feet away from glass. An orchid sitting beside a bright east-facing window may thrive. The same orchid across the room may struggle. That's a massive difference. Experienced orchid growers understand this immediately. Light drives everything. Without enough light, success becomes difficult. Imagine an orchid sitting near a bright window. Healthy roots, strong leaves, regular growth, flower spikes appearing every year. That's exactly what proper lighting can do. Now here's an expert tip. For most Phalaenopsis orchids, bright, indirect light is ideal. Morning sunlight is usually beneficial. Harsh afternoon sun should be filtered. And honestly, many struggling orchids are simply one better window away from success. But even perfect light and perfect watering won't save an orchid from the next mistake, because this one slowly damages the roots without most people ever noticing. Mistake number 4. Using regular potting soil. This mistake kills countless orchids every year. And honestly, many people don't even realize they're doing anything wrong, because when they see roots, they think soil. That's what most plants grow in, right? Tomatoes grow in soil. Roses grow in soil. Houseplants grow in soil. So orchids should grow in soil too. Seems logical, but here's the hidden truth. Many orchids naturally grow without soil at all. That changes everything. Most orchid owners never hear this. In nature, many orchids attach themselves to tree branches. Their roots cling to bark. Rain provides moisture. Air provides oxygen. The roots remain exposed and breathable. Scientifically speaking, orchid roots evolved to absorb both moisture and oxygen simultaneously. Traditional potting soil often holds too much water and too little air. The roots stay wet. Oxygen decreases. Root rot begins, and the plant slowly declines. Imagine taking a marathon runner and forcing them to breathe through a thick blanket. Eventually, performance suffers. Orchid roots experience something similar in dense, soggy soil. That's why orchids often struggle in regular potting mixes. Now here's where things become interesting. Many orchid owners don't notice the problem immediately. The flowers may remain beautiful for weeks. The leaves may stay green for months. Meanwhile, the roots are quietly deteriorating. By the time visible symptoms appear, significant damage may already exist. That's why this mistake is so dangerous. It hides beneath the surface. Experienced orchid growers understand something important. Healthy roots require airflow. That's why orchid bark mixes exist. Chunks of bark, perlite, charcoal, other coarse materials, all designed to create air pockets. Airflow becomes possible. Roots stay healthier. The entire plant performs better. Imagine an orchid growing in a loose bark mix. Water flows through easily. Fresh oxygen reaches the roots. The roots remain firm and healthy. New growth appears regularly. That's exactly what orchids were designed for. Now here's an expert tip. If your orchid is growing in dense potting soil, consider repotting into a quality orchid mix designed specifically for orchids. The difference can be dramatic. And honestly, many struggling orchids begin recovering almost immediately after receiving a better root environment. But even the best orchid mix won't help if you ignore the most important part of the entire plant. And that's exactly what the next mistake involves. Mistake number 3. Ignoring root health. This may be the biggest mindset shift an orchid owner can make. And honestly, it's the moment many people finally become successful with orchids. Now here's the misconception. Most beginners focus entirely on the leaves and flowers. The flowers look beautiful. The leaves look green. Everything seems fine. But experienced orchid growers focus somewhere else. The roots. That changes everything. Because healthy roots create healthy orchids. Most orchid owners never hear this. The roots tell the real story. Long before the leaves show problems. Long before flowers disappear. Long before the plant starts declining. The roots usually reveal what's happening first. Scientifically speaking, roots perform several critical jobs. They absorb water, absorb nutrients, store resources, anchor the plant, support growth. Without healthy roots, nothing else works properly. Imagine a beautiful house built on a damaged foundation. At first, everything appears normal. Then cracks begin forming. Problems start appearing. Eventually, the entire structure suffers. Orchids work the same way. Root problems eventually become plant problems. Now, here's where things become interesting. Healthy orchid roots are surprisingly attractive. Firm, plump, often green when hydrated, silvery when dry. They look alive. Damaged roots look very different. Brown, soft, mushy, collapsed. Those are warning signs. And experienced growers inspect roots regularly. Not because they're obsessed, because roots provide information. Most gardeners never realize how much information. Imagine lifting a clear orchid pot. You immediately see healthy green roots wrapping around the bark. The plant is actively growing. Everything looks vigorous. That's reassuring. Now imagine seeing dark, mushy roots instead. The flowers may still look fine, but the future looks very different. That's why root inspection matters. It helps identify problems before they become disasters. Experienced growers don't wait for symptoms. They monitor root health proactively. And honestly, that's one reason they achieve such consistent success. Now here's an expert tip. Whenever possible, use clear orchid pots. They're incredibly helpful for beginners. You can monitor moisture levels, root color, root health, without disturbing the plant. And honestly, that simple visibility can prevent countless mistakes. But even healthy roots and perfect growing media won't protect orchids from the next problem. Because this one often happens. Mistake number 2. Over-fertilizing your orchid. This mistake comes from good intentions. And honestly, that's what makes it so common. Most orchid owners want bigger flowers, more flower spikes, faster growth, a healthier plant. So they fertilize, then fertilize again. And sometimes they fertilize even more. Because if a little fertilizer helps, more fertilizer should help even more. Right? Unfortunately, orchids don't work that way. That changes everything. Most orchid owners never hear this. Orchids evolved in environments where nutrients arrive slowly, very slowly. A little rainwater washes over roots. Tiny amounts of organic matter decompose nearby. Small nutrient inputs accumulate over time. That's how orchids naturally grow. Scientifically speaking, orchid roots are highly sensitive to salt buildup. Many fertilizers contain mineral salts. When excessive fertilizer accumulates around roots, root damage can occur. Water absorption becomes more difficult. Growth slows. And ironically, the plant becomes less healthy, not more healthy. Imagine drinking seawater when you're thirsty. The water is there, but your body struggles to use it properly. Excess fertilizer can create a similar challenge for orchid roots. Most beginners never realize this. They see slower growth, assume the orchid needs more food, and accidentally make the problem worse. Now here's where things become interesting. Experienced orchid growers often follow a simple philosophy. Feed lightly, feed consistently, not heavily. That approach works remarkably well, because orchids generally perform better with gentle nutrition than aggressive feeding. Imagine 2 orchids. One receives heavy fertilizer applications every week. The other receives light, balanced feeding. Months later, the second orchid often has healthier roots, healthier leaves, and better flowering potential. That's the power of moderation. Nature usually prefers balance, not extremes. Now, here's another hidden truth. Many orchids can survive surprisingly well with very little fertilizer. They cannot survive long with severely damaged roots. That's why protecting roots always comes first. Flowers come later. Experienced growers understand this instinctively. Imagine a healthy orchid growing steadily for years. New roots appearing, new leaves developing, flower spikes returning regularly. The owner isn't trying to force growth. They're supporting growth. And honestly, that's the secret. Now here's an expert tip. Use an orchid fertilizer at reduced strength and follow label recommendations carefully. Mistake number 1. Never repotting an aging orchid. This is the mistake that surprises people most, because the orchid may look perfectly fine, at least at first. The leaves remain green, the roots appear acceptable, the plant survives, so the owner assumes everything is working. And year after year, nothing changes. That seems harmless. But here's the hidden truth. Orchid potting media doesn't last forever. That changes everything. Most orchid owners never hear this. Bark breaks down, organic materials decompose, air spaces disappear, drainage declines. The environment surrounding the roots slowly changes. And not for the better. Scientifically speaking, fresh orchid bark creates large air pockets that allow oxygen to reach the roots. As bark decomposes, those air pockets shrink, moisture remains longer, oxygen decreases, root health gradually suffers. The process is slow, which makes it difficult to notice. Imagine living in a house where the ventilation becomes slightly worse every year. You may not notice immediately, but eventually comfort declines. Orchid roots experience something similar, and that's why repotting matters. Now here's where things become interesting. Many struggling orchids don't actually need more water, or more fertilizer, or more light. They simply need a fresh growing environment. Experienced growers understand this. Repotting isn't a rescue procedure. It's routine maintenance. And honestly, that mindset changes everything. Imagine an orchid growing in the same bark mix for 5 years. The material becomes compacted. Drainage slows. Roots struggle. Flowering declines. Now imagine repotting into fresh bark. Fresh airflow. Fresh drainage. Fresh growing conditions. The orchid suddenly begins producing vigorous new roots. Growth improves. Future flower spikes become more likely. That's not magic. It's maintenance. Most gardeners never hear this. Some of the healthiest orchids in the world are repotted regularly before serious problems ever appear. Prevention always beats recovery, and experienced growers know it. Imagine walking into your home and seeing an orchid that has been blooming reliably for years. Healthy roots, healthy leaves, strong growth. That kind of long-term success rarely happens by accident. It's usually the result of small, consistent habits. Repotting is one of those habits. Now here's an expert tip. Most Phalaenopsis orchids benefit from repotting every 1 to 2 years, depending on the condition of the growing medium. Fresh bark often makes a bigger difference than people expect. And honestly, many orchids begin improving almost immediately after repotting. Today we've explored number 1, kitchen scrap compost. Every kitchen produces waste. Fruit bales, vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, tea leaves, eggshells. Most of these materials end up in the trash. For gardeners, however, they're the raw ingredients for one of the most valuable fertilizers available, kitchen scrap compost. And honestly, this may be the most powerful fertilizer on today's list. Now here's the hidden truth. Many gardeners think compost is simply a homemade fertilizer. It's much more than that. Kitchen scrap compost doesn't just provide nutrients. It improves the entire soil ecosystem. That changes everything. Because healthy gardens depend on more than nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. They depend on healthy soil structure, beneficial microorganisms, moisture retention, root development, and long-term fertility. Kitchen scrap compost helps support all of these at the same time. As organic materials break down, microorganisms convert them into nutrient-rich humus. This process gradually releases nutrients while improving soil quality. The finished compost contains a wide range of nutrients including nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and trace minerals. More importantly, it helps create the kind of soil where plants naturally thrive. That's why experienced gardeners often build entire gardening programs around compost. Now let's talk about how to use it. Finished compost can be mixed into garden beds before planting. It can be added to planting holes, used as a top dressing around vegetables, flowers, shrubs, and fruit trees, or blended into container mixes. Most gardeners apply 1 to 2 inches around plants and lightly work it into the soil surface. Spring is an excellent time to apply compost. but it can also be added throughout the growing season. Kitchen scrap compost works particularly well for tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, squash, roses, hydrangeas, herbs, fruit trees, and nearly every other garden plant. Now here's an important mistake to avoid. Don't use fresh kitchen scraps directly around plants. Unfinished materials may attract pests and can interfere with nutrient availability while decomposing. Allow the composting process to finish completely before applying it to the garden. Finished compost should be dark, crumbly, and smell like fresh earth. That's when it's ready. So, what results should gardeners expect? Many gardeners notice healthier soil within a single season. Plants often develop stronger roots, better growth, improved moisture retention, and greater resilience during stressful weather. Over time, gardens become easier to maintain because the soil itself becomes healthier. That's why so many experienced gardeners consider compost the ultimate natural fertilizer. In other words, if you could choose only one natural fertilizer for your garden, kitchen scrap compost would be one of the smartest choices you could make. Healthy plants rarely depend on a single fertilizer. The most successful gardeners focus on building healthy soil while providing nutrients consistently throughout the growing season. Today we covered 8 natural fertilizers that can help improve soil health and support stronger plant growth. From banana peels and coffee grounds, to fish emulsion, worm castings, and kitchen scrap compost. Each one offers unique benefits. The key is choosing the right fertilizer for the right situation. Remember, great gardens aren't built overnight. They're built one small improvement at a time. And sometimes the materials that create the healthiest plants are the ones most people throw away. Now we'd love to hear from you. Which natural fertilizer has worked best in your garden? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another gardening tip. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.